You know how it is these days, right?
Yeah.
Just information coming at you from all sides.
It's a lot.
It really is overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, and what you really want, what you crave, is just the core stuff. The insights that actually matter, that help you understand things without getting buried in details.
Exactly, that aha moment.
That's what we do here on the Deep Dive. We try to be that shortcut for you, the learner. Quick, but thorough.
And we know you value that, getting the real substance without all the noise.
So today, we've got something pretty deep, actually. We're diving into some excerpts you shared with us from Pietro Ubaldi's The Descent of Ideals.
It's fascinating stuff. Really looks at how our big ideas, our ideals, clash and connect with, well, just being human.
Yeah.
The messy reality of it all.
Sounds complex. What kind of ground did these excerpts cover?
Oh, quite a bit. It touches on how religions change over time, what really drives revolutions, the purpose of suffering, which is an interesting take.
Okay.
And these concepts he had, these involutive and evolutive forces. Plus, he's got some pretty strong critiques of modern thought, too. So our mission today.
Our mission is to pull out the absolute key ideas from Ubaldi here. We want to help you really get a handle on how ideals land in the real world, how they get adopted, how they shift and change.
And maybe find some surprising angles along the way.
Hopefully. There are definitely some perspectives in there that make you stop and think.
All right, let's start with that title then. The Descent of Ideals. Descent. That sounds a bit negative, maybe. Why do ideals need to descend?
Well, it's not necessarily negative in Ubaldi's view. The core idea is pretty straightforward, actually. For an ideal to actually take root, to have an impact on Earth, it can't just stay as this pure abstract concept way up high. Ubaldi says it has to sort of come down to the level of the people who are going to live by it.
Adapt, you mean?
Exactly. Adapt to the earthly environment, adapt to basic human needs and, limitations. He uses the example of early Christianity and Emperor Constantine.
Ah, right, Constantine. The whole thing with granting the papacy worldly power. How does that fit?
Precisely that. Ubaldi suggests that move, giving the church temporal, political power, while it looks like a step away from pure spirituality towards earthly stuff. He argues it was actually necessary for Christianity to spread and survive back then.
So, like a strategic compromise.
Kind of. For those big spiritual ideals to actually gain traction and last, they needed a practical base, a foothold in the messy reality of administration, influence, power.
Even if it diluted the original message a bit.
Potentially, yes. Ubaldi sees it as a necessary adaptation for that ideal to actually function and grow in that specific historical moment, a descent into practicality.
Okay, so there's this built-in tension, isn't there, between the pure ideal and what humans actually need or maybe want.
Absolutely. And that leads right into another key idea Ubaldi talks about, inverted priorities.
Inverted priorities.
Yeah. Think about it. Pure ideals often point towards spiritual growth, maybe even sacrificing earthly comfort or life for a higher purpose.
Right.
But humans, our primary drive, especially historically, is survival. Thriving right here, right now.
So the priorities are flipped.
Exactly. And Ubaldi says humans naturally try to, use ideals to help them win the struggle for life. They adapt religion, for example, to fit their needs, their convenience, their desire for success.
So instead of the ideal changing us, we try to change the ideal to suit us.
That's a good way to put it. The original goal gets kind of bent towards more immediate earthly goals.
Okay. Now, you mentioned evolution earlier. Ubaldi sees that as a big driver. How does that connect with ideals coming down to Earth?
Yeah, evolution is huge for Ubaldi. He sees it as this unstoppable force, pushing everything towards greater unification, higher states of being.
Okay.
And he talks about two opposing forces within this. Involutive and evolutive transformism.
Involutive and evolutive. Can you break those down?
Sure. Think of involutive as the pull downwards towards more basic material states like selfishness, conflict, base instincts, the anti-system, he sometimes calls it.
Got it. And evolutive.
That's the push upwards towards higher, more spiritual, more unified states. Altruism, understanding, cooperation. The system, aiming for order. History, for Ubaldi, is this constant tug-of-war between these two.
And where are we, humanity, in this tug-of-war right now, according to him?
He thinks we're at a really crucial point, a biological turning point, he calls it.
Biological.
Yeah, meaning we're shifting away from just basic physical survival being the absolute main focus. We've built more complex societies, more civilization.
Right, we have more safety, more resources generally.
Exactly. So the focus can shift towards developing our minds, our spirits. But here's the catch.
Oh.
With more power, more leisure time, There's a big danger we use it in an involutive way. Indulgence, chasing lower desires, which could lead to decline. Or we consciously use these advantages for evolutive purposes. Higher intellectual pursuits, spiritual growth, building a better world. It's a choice point.
That brings us to suffering, which you mentioned. It's like a very involutive thing. How does he fit that in?
It's interesting. He doesn't see suffering as just random or purely negative. He sees it as a corrective agent, a feedback mechanism.
Like a teacher.
Sort of, yeah. When we make mistakes, misuse our power, go down the wrong path, the involutive path suffering is often the natural consequence. It forces us, eventually, to learn.
Pushes us towards self-discipline.
And developing conscience, yes. The pain makes us realize the error, hopefully. He uses the example of modern inventions first may be used for destructive things, like war.
Right.
But the suffering that causes eventually pushes us to find better, more constructive uses, learning through pain, essentially, paving the way for spiritual progress, strangely enough.
So even bad experiences can serve this larger evolutionary purpose. Okay, what about revolutions? He sees those differently too, doesn't he? Not just politics.
Definitely. For Ubaldi, revolutions are tools of evolution. They happen when the old ways, the past, become too rigid and resist the necessary changes, the push towards renewal.
When things get stuck.
Exactly. And he talks about phases like preparation, the explosion itself, then expansion, finding a balance or accommodation, and finally, crystallization.
Crystallization, like things settling down again.
Yeah, when the revolutionary ideal becomes the new normal, the new set of institutions. But here's the key point related to our descent idea. As those ideals go through these messy, real-world phases.
Always a change.
They adapt, they get molded, and yeah, Ubaldi is blunt, they often get corrupted too. The pure fire of the ideal cools down as it takes root in material reality and human interests.
And that makes sense, actually. It has to fit into the world somehow.
Right. Now, he also had some sharp words for thinkers of his time, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre.
Oh, interesting. What was his issue there?
It was really about negation, about tearing down. Ubaldi was very critical of what he saw as a trend in Sartre and elsewhere in art and philosophy, focused on negativity, on destroying values.
And the danger of that.
His argument was pretty stark. He believed that destroying spiritual values inevitably leads down a path to material destruction, too. He uses this image of a child playing with a loaded gun wrecking things without understanding the consequences.
Wow. So he's contrasting that pessimism
with his own philosophy, which is fundamentally one of hope. He believed ideals aren't just nice ideas, they're biologically necessary. They have real value for our survival and progress.
That connects back to the system versus anti-system idea, doesn't it? Order versus chaos.
It does, very much so. He sees this constant struggle playing out everywhere. The evolutive push towards unity, order, the system, versus the involutive pull towards separation, conflict, chaos, the anti-system.
And ideals can get caught up in this.
Absolutely. He points out that people can use the language of ideals, talk about unity or higher purpose, but actually be driven by self-interest, by the anti-system's divisive tendencies. It can be a mask.
That's quite cynical, or maybe just realistic. How does he apply this evolutionary lens to religion itself?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even controversial for some. He argues that religions, even though they often claim to have the final, unchanging truth, are actually evolving too. They adapt over time, just like everything else. And often, he suggests, they kind of lag behind progress in secular thought or science.
So there's a contradiction there.
Yeah.
Claiming to be timeless, but actually changing.
That's exactly the contradiction he points out. How can something be eternally fixed, but also need to evolve to stay relevant? He gives the example of how our concept of God has changed from maybe an absolute monarch ruling over chaos.
Right, like in some older texts.
To perhaps a more nuanced idea, like a center of conscious coordination working within laws. That's an evolution of an ideal.
He specifically looked at Catholicism too, didn't he? What did he see happening there?
He did. He analyzed the crisis or challenges within Catholicism at the time. And his diagnosis was that the main problems weren't external attacks, not materialism or communism, primarily.
But internal.
Yes. Things like inertia, spiritual indifference, the institution maybe not fulfilling its vital function anymore. His point is that spirituality, the core human need, is always there. If one form isn't working or evolving, that spiritual energy will look for new outlets.
Which leads to that really provocative idea you mentioned earlier about hypocrisy maybe being an adaptation. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? But it follows from his descent logic. He suggests that maybe, just maybe, the hypocrisy we sometimes see in how religions play out on Earth.
The gap between the preaching and the practice.
Exactly. That gap might be a sort of natural, almost unavoidable adaptation because the pure ideal is so high and human nature is still largely driven by involuted survival instincts. Well, maybe full adherence just isn't possible for a mass movement yet.
So the hypocrisy is the ideal bending to meet the lower involuted level.
That's the uncomfortable idea he puts forward, a compromise inherent in the dissent. It's a pretty sobering thought about how ideals work in the real world.
He also uses these masculine, feminine metaphors, right? How do they fit into this?
Yes. It's metaphorical, important to stress that. He links the masculine principle, metaphorically, with things like egoism, force, structure, worldly power.
Okay.
And the feminine principle with goodness, sacrifice, intuition, the core spiritual ideal.
Like the heart of Christianity, maybe?
That's how he frames it. He suggests the original feminine ideal of Christianity, focused on love and sacrifice, was powerful initially. But then, after Constantine and the move towards worldly power,
The masculine principle took over.
yes, the structure, the force, the administration gained dominance. But, and this is typical Ubaldi, even that inverted phase, that seemingly less spiritual, more masculine dominance.
That purpose.
He argues it did. It served a civilizing function, helped bring order, structure, even if it was in this hypocritical or compromised way. It was part of a long, slow evolutionary process.
So even the compromises, the dissents, play a role in the grand scheme of things. Where does he see all this heading? What's the future look like in his view?
His ultimate vision is for a synthesis, a future where we bring together the best of human thought.
Like science and religion.
Exactly. The analytical power of science, its focus on evidence and mechanism, integrated with the intuitive wisdom of religion, its focus on meaning and purpose.
Guided by reason?
Guided by rational understanding, yes. Moving beyond just looking at how things work, to understanding why, getting past a purely materialistic view of life, that's the goal he points towards.
Oh, okay, so let's try and wrap this up for you, the learner. The big picture from Ubaldi seems to be, well, ideals aren't simple. They don't just appear and everyone follows them perfectly.
Not at all. They have to come down to earth. They interact with messy human nature, with our survival needs, our limitations. They adapt, they change. Sometimes they even seem corrupted.
And this whole process is driven by these bigger forces, this evolutionary push and pull between higher aspirations and more basic instincts.
Right. And understanding that dynamic, that constant tension, can really give you a useful lens for looking at the world. You can start to see it playing out in politics, in social movements, in religion.
Helps make sense of the contradictions, maybe, why things aren't always straightforward.
Exactly. Apparent setbacks or hypocrisies might just be part of this long, complicated journey of ideals trying to take root. It's a long game.
So here's something to leave you with, a final thought to chew on.
Yeah.
As we, humanity, get more powerful technologically, scientifically, as our understanding grows, are we actually getting better at consciously guiding this descent? Are we deliberately shaping how our ideals land in the world, aiming for that higher evolutive future Ubaldi talks about?
Are we still mostly just reacting, still driven by those older, more primitive, involutive forces, the self-interest, the division, the anti-system?
It's a big question. Where do you see yourself and us collectively in that process? Something to think about.
Definitely. And if this sparked your interest, we really encourage you to look deeper into Ubaldi's own writings or explore thinkers who grapple with similar ideas. Keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive today.